There was a note, a simple one, but its meaning was far from simple. It was written in Walter's careful, deliberate handwriting, just 2 words. I know. That was all he left behind, apart from his empty chair, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the air, and the eerie silence that now consumed our home. I've been standing in front of that note for hours now, as if staring long enough will change its meaning, as if I could somehow go back to the moment before I found it. But there's no going back. There hasn't been for a long time. For 12 years, I kept my secret buried. 12 long years of lies, whispered words, and stolen moments. I thought I had covered my tracks, that my life would go on just as it always had, that I could have both my marriage and the escape that had kept me alive. But Walter's note, those 2 chilling words, shattered everything. And now he's gone. Where did he go? What does he plan to do? I know my husband well enough to know this isn't over, not by a long shot. Walter was always the calculating type, a quiet man who never raised his voice, but the silence spoke volumes. And that silence, it terrifies me now. Because it's not just the absence of words, it's the calm before the storm. I'm standing here, in the empty house we've shared for more than 40 years, and for the first time, I feel like a stranger. The life I knew is slipping through my fingers, dissolving into the same kind of uncertainty that has plagued me since the day I met him. Ethan, the young man who turned my world upside down. The one I thought I could forget, but never did. The one who reminded me that I was still alive when Walter became a ghost in his own home. But this isn't about Ethan, not really. It's about Walter. It's about the lengths he's willing to go to now that he knows the truth. I've tried calling him. No answer. I've searched the house, desperate for any sign of where he might have gone, but it's like he vanished into thin air. And that's what scares me most. The not knowing. The waiting. The knowledge that somewhere out there, Walter is watching, waiting, planning. He's always been patient, a man who plays the long game. And now I'm at his mercy, not knowing when or if he'll strike. The worst part? I deserve this. Every last bit of it. I did this. I lied, I cheated, and I thought I could get away with it. But now I'm standing in the ruins of the life I built, knowing that my husband is out there somewhere waiting to destroy what's left, and I have no idea what's coming next. I never thought my life would turn out like this. Looking back, I wonder if there was a moment, a single decision that led me down this path, or if it was a series of small, imperceptible choices that slowly eroded everything I thought I knew about myself. The truth is, I can't pinpoint when it all started. I just know that once I crossed that line, there was no going back. It was 12 years ago when I first met Ethan. I had just turned 56, a successful gallery owner in a small coastal town in New England, married to Walter for nearly 3 decades. Our life together was quiet, comfortable, predictable. Walter was a partner at an investment firm, and though his work took him away often, we had built a life of mutual respect. But respect isn't the same as passion, and over the years the passion had slipped away, replaced by routines and formalities. The gallery was my escape, my sanctuary. I poured myself into curating art, organizing exhibitions, and nurturing young talent. That's where Ethan came in. He was a struggling painter in his early 30s, full of potential but unsure of himself, raw in both talent and emotion. There was something about him, a spark I hadn't seen in anyone in a long time. He had that restless energy of youth, the kind that reminded me of who I used to be before life settled into its familiar patterns. I didn't notice it at first, but we were drawn to each other. I was his mentor, his champion, but somewhere along the way, our relationship shifted. It started with long conversations after gallery hours, when we'd sip wine and talk about art, life, dreams. Ethan had a way of making me feel seen, alive, in a way that I hadn't felt in years. Walter, for all his stability, had become distant, more interested in his work than in me. One evening, after a particularly successful exhibition, Ethan and I were celebrating in my office. It had been a long day, and the gallery was quiet, the soft hum of the ocean waves just outside the window. He looked at me in a way that made my heart race, a look that said everything neither of us had dared to voice. And then, before I could stop it, he kissed me. I wish I could say that I pulled away, that I remembered my marriage vows, that I thought of Walter waiting for me at home. But I didn't. I let myself get swept up in the moment, in the desire to feel alive again. That night, Ethan and I crossed a line we could never uncross. It wasn't just about the physical affair. It was about the connection, the escape from the life I had built with Walter. I convinced myself that it didn't mean anything, that it was just a brief lapse in judgment, but as the weeks turned into months and the months into years, Ethan became a constant presence in my life. I became adept at leading a double life. With Walter traveling frequently for work, it wasn't difficult to hide my affair. Ethan and I would meet in secret, his tiny studio apartment, or sometimes the gallery after hours. I kept my phone locked, my texts and emails carefully deleted. I told myself that I was in control, that no one would ever find out. But deep down, I knew it couldn't last. I was living on borrowed time, and eventually the debt would come due. The years passed, and the affair continued. Ethan grew more dependent on me, not just emotionally, but financially as well. I helped fund his art projects, paid his rent when his exhibitions didn't sell. In return, he made me feel young again, vibrant, like I was more than just the aging wife of a businessman who barely noticed my presence. I told myself I could keep the two parts of my life separate. I loved Walter in my own way, but our marriage had become a convenience more than anything else. We were like business partners, coexisting in the same space without truly connecting. Ethan was the spark that kept me from feeling like I was fading away, and for a while, that was enough. But the guilt was always there, lurking beneath the surface. Every time I sat across from Walter at the dinner table, or we attended social functions together, I felt like an imposter. I wondered if he could see it, if he suspected. But Walter was a man of few words, and if he noticed the changes in me, he never said anything. And so the affair continued, year after year. I told myself that I deserved this, that after years of being ignored, I had earned the right to seek happiness elsewhere. But I was lying to myself, just as I had been lying to Walter for 12 years. It wasn't until recently that things started to unravel. Ethan became more demanding, less patient. He wanted more from me, more time, more money, more commitment. He began to resent the fact that I still had a life with Walter, that I wasn't willing to leave my marriage for him. The thrill of our secret affair started to fade, replaced by the harsh reality of what I had done. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to end it. I was trapped, caught between the life I had built with Walter and the affair that had defined my life for over a decade. I knew it would come crashing down eventually, but I didn't expect it to happen like this. I didn't expect Walter to find out. And now, as I stand here in the ruins of my carefully constructed life, I can't help but wonder, how much did Walter know? How long had he known? And what is he planning to do next? Walter was never one for grand gestures or emotional outbursts. He was the kind of man who kept his thoughts to himself, who processed everything in quiet deliberation. That was one of the things I had once admired about him, his calm, steady nature. But over the years, that quietness had become a wall between us, a barrier I could never seem to break through. And now, that same calm was what terrified me the most. Looking back, I should have known that Walter would never confront me head-on. That wasn't his style. He was always methodical, always patient. It was what made him such a successful businessman. He knew how to wait, how to bide his time until the moment was right. And that's exactly what he did. I don't know when he first suspected. Maybe it was something as simple as a look on my face, or the way I started coming home later and later from the gallery. Maybe it was the subtle changes in my behavior that I thought I was hiding so well. Or maybe it was something more concrete, an overheard conversation, a text message I forgot to delete. Whatever it was, Walter didn't let on. He continued living his life as if nothing had changed, going to work, attending business meetings, and traveling for his job. But in the background he was watching, waiting, gathering evidence. That's what he was best at, collecting information, putting together the pieces of the puzzle. It wasn't until much later that I realized just how much he had uncovered. One evening, about 6 months ago, I came home from the gallery to find Walter sitting in his study, his laptop open in front of him. He looked up as I walked in, his expression unreadable. "Long day?" he asked, his tone casual. I nodded, feeling a flicker of unease. "Yes, there was a new exhibit coming in, and we had to rearrange the whole gallery." He didn't say anything in response, just nodded and went back to his laptop. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something. I wasn't sure what. But there was nothing. No accusation, no confrontation. Just silence. That was the first time I thought something might be wrong, but I pushed the feeling aside. Walter had always been reserved. There was no reason to believe he knew anything. And yet, as the weeks passed, I began to notice little things, changes in his behavior that I couldn't quite explain. He started spending more time at home, working from his study instead of the office. He was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. But when I asked him if everything was all right, he brushed it off, saying he was just tired, that work had been stressful. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that everything was still under control. But then, a few weeks ago, I found something that made my heart stop. I was in Walter's study, looking for a document I needed for the gallery, when I came across a folder on his desk. It was plain, unmarked, but something about it caught my attention. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it. Inside were printouts of emails between me and Ethan. Some of them were from years ago, others more recent. There were also photos of Ethan and me together, taken from a distance. I stared at the documents, my hands shaking, my mind racing. How had he gotten these? How long had he known? I shoved the folder back where I found it and hurried out of the study, my heart pounding in my chest. That night I barely slept, my mind consumed with the realization that Walter knew everything. But he hadn't said a word. Not yet. The next few weeks were torture. I couldn't concentrate at the gallery, couldn't focus on anything but the knowledge that my marriage was crumbling around me. Every time I looked at Walter, I wondered when he would confront me, when the inevitable explosion would come. But it never did. Instead, Walter remained calm, distant, as if nothing had changed. And that was what terrified me the most, because I knew deep down that this silence wasn't the absence of anger, it was the calm before the storm. It's been 2 days since Walter disappeared. 2 days since I found that note on the bathroom mirror, those 2 words that have haunted me ever since. I know. I haven't been able to sleep, haven't been able to eat. Every time I close my eyes, all I can see is Walter's face, the look in his eyes when he found out the truth. And now, he's gone. Just like that. At first I thought he had left to clear his head, to get away from me and the mess I had created. I told myself he would come back, that we would talk, that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to fix this. But as the hours turned into days, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Walter isn't coming back, not in the way I hoped. The house feels different without him here. It's too quiet, too still. The familiar sounds of his presence, the creak of the floorboards as he moved through the house, the soft rustle of his newspaper in the mornings, are gone, and the silence is deafening. I wander from room to room, searching for something, anything, that might give me a clue as to where he's gone, but there's nothing. The note is all I have. I've tried calling his phone, but it goes straight to voicemail every time. I've left messages, pleading with him to come home, to at least talk to me, but there's been no response. I don't know where he is, and that's what terrifies me the most. I'm not the only one who's noticed his absence. The neighbors have started asking questions, wondering why they haven't seen Walter around. I've told them he's away on business, but I can see the doubt in their eyes. They know something's wrong. And then there's Greg. Greg, our son, lives in Boston. We don't see him often. He's busy with his job at a law firm, and he and Walter never had the closest relationship. But when Walter didn't show up for their monthly phone call, Greg called me, concerned. "Mom, where's Dad?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. I hesitated, not sure what to say. I didn't want to lie to him, but I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth either. Not yet. "He's away on business," I said, hating how weak my voice sounded. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Business? Since when does Dad travel for business anymore?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. It was a last-minute thing. He didn't have time to tell anyone. Greg didn't respond right away, and I could feel the weight of his suspicion pressing down on me. He knew something was off, but he didn't push. Not yet. "Okay," he said finally, "but if you hear from him, let me know. I'm worried, Mom." "I will," I promised, though the words felt hollow. After I hung up the phone, I collapsed onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. What was I going to do? How long could I keep this up? Greg wasn't the only one who would start asking questions. Walter's colleagues, his friends, people would notice his absence, and I didn't have any answers. The next morning, I tried going to the gallery, hoping that work might distract me, but it was impossible to focus. Every time the phone rang, I jumped, half expecting it to be Walter calling to say, I don't even know what. That he was coming home? That he had forgiven me? That he had decided to leave me for good? But the call never came. Instead, as I was closing up for the day, I received a different kind of message. I was locking the front door of the gallery when my phone buzzed with a new text. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be a client, or maybe Emma, my business partner, but the number was unfamiliar, and the message was brief. "You'll pay for this." I stared at the words, my heart racing. Who was this? Was it Walter? Had he found some way to contact me without using his phone? Or was it someone else? Someone who knew about the affair, about what I had done? I texted back, my fingers trembling as I typed, "Who is this?" But there was no response. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. What if Walter was out there, somewhere, plotting his revenge? What if he wasn't just leaving me? What if he was planning to destroy me, to take everything from me, the way I had taken everything from him? The next day, I received another message, this one even more cryptic. "It's only just beginning." I tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail. The messages continued over the next few days, each one more ominous than the last. I started to feel like I was being watched, like someone was always just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. I didn't know if it was Walter or someone else, but the fear was consuming me. I couldn't leave the house without looking over my shoulder, couldn't sleep without imagining someone standing outside my window, watching, waiting. And through it all, Walter remained silent. It didn't take long for everything to start falling apart. Walter had always been the one who handled our finances, our investments, everything related to money. I never questioned it. He was good at what he did, and I trusted him to make the right decisions for our future. But now, with him gone, I realized just how little control I had over my own life. The first sign that something was wrong came when I tried to access our joint bank account. I needed to withdraw some money to pay the bills, but when I logged in, I was met with an error message. The account had been frozen. I called the bank, hoping it was just a mistake, but the woman on the other end of the line confirmed my worst fears. Walter had closed the account weeks ago, transferring the funds into an account under his name alone. I was left with nothing. Panic set in. How could he do this? How could he take everything from me without a word, without warning? I tried calling his phone again, desperate for answers, but it was still disconnected. Next, I went to the gallery, hoping to find some solace in my work, but things were unraveling there too. Emma, my business partner, greeted me with a strained expression. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight. I followed her into the back office, my stomach in knots. I had a feeling I knew what was coming, but I wasn't prepared for the full extent of it. "We're in trouble, Helen," Emma said, handing me a stack of papers. "The gallery's finances are a mess. Walter's been pulling money from the business account for months. I tried to cover it, but there's not enough left." I stared at the papers in disbelief. Walter had been draining the gallery's funds too? Why? What was he doing with all that money? "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Emma sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't either. But we're going to have to sell some of the art just to keep the doors open." The gallery had been my passion project for years. It was the one thing in my life that was entirely mine, the one place where I felt in control, and now even that was slipping through my fingers. "Is there anything we can do?" I asked, feeling a wave of helplessness wash over me. Emma shook her head. "Not unless Walter comes back and explains what the hell he's been doing with the money." But I knew that wasn't going to happen. Walter wasn't coming back, and he wasn't going to explain anything. The next few weeks were a blur of confusion and frustration. The cryptic messages continued, each one more threatening than the last, but I still couldn't figure out who was sending them. I tried talking to Greg again, hoping he might have some insight, but he was distant, cold. "Mom, you need to face the fact that Dad might not come back," Greg said over the phone one evening. "He's not the kind of man who forgives easily." I knew Greg was right, but hearing it from him made it all the more real. Walter wasn't just angry. He was gone, and I had no idea what he was planning to do next. As the gallery's financial situation worsened, Emma grew more frustrated. She tried to keep things running smoothly, but the strain was taking its toll on both of us. One afternoon, as I was sorting through a stack of overdue invoices, Emma burst into the office, her face pale. "You need to see this," she said, handing me a letter. I opened it, my hands trembling. It was from a lawyer, informing me that Walter had filed for divorce and was seeking full control of all our shared assets, including the gallery. He had already put the house on the market, and the proceeds from the sale would go directly into his account. I couldn't breathe. My entire life was crumbling before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Walter wasn't just leaving me, he was erasing me. Racing. I didn't realize how thoroughly Walter had planned his revenge until the day I received the envelope. It was a thick manila envelope, postmarked from a nearby city, with no return address. Inside, I found a series of legal documents, divorce papers, property transfers, and financial statements that made my blood run cold. Walter had been systematically removing me from our shared life for months, maybe even longer. Every asset, every account, every piece of property we owned was now under his name alone. I was left with nothing. The final document was a letter, written in Walter's familiar, neat handwriting. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands shaking as I unfolded the paper. "Helen, by now you've realized what I've done. You might think this is cruel, but it's no more than you deserve. For 12 years you lied to me. For 12 years you made a mockery of our marriage. I'm not the kind of man who forgives easily, and you should have known that. I've been planning this for a long time, ever since I first suspected. You thought you could have it all, your life with me, and your little affair on the side. But I've taken everything from you, just like you took everything from me. The house will be sold, the gallery will be transferred to new ownership, and you will be left with nothing. I've made sure of that. I don't expect you to understand, but maybe now you'll realize what it feels like to be betrayed. Goodbye, Helen. I stared at the letter, my heart pounding in my chest. Walter had planned this, every move, every detail. He hadn't just left me, he had destroyed me. And the worst part was, I had no one to blame but myself. For 12 years I had lived a lie, convincing myself that I could keep my marriage and my affair separate. But now I was paying the price for my deception. The house, the gallery, the life I had built with Walter, all of it was gone. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to process the enormity of what had happened. The cryptic messages continued, but they no longer mattered. Walter had taken everything from me, and I was powerless to fight back. One afternoon, as I was packing up the last of my belongings from the house, I received one final text. "It's over." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Walter had won. I should have known that Walter wouldn't just disappear without a final confrontation. It had been weeks since I received the letter, weeks since I had come to terms with the fact that my life was over. The house had been sold, the gallery was in the process of being transferred to new ownership, and I was living in a small apartment on the other side of town, trying to figure out what to do next. But then one evening I received a phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. "Meet me at the old lighthouse," the voice on the other end said. It was Walter. My heart raced. I hadn't heard his voice in weeks, and now, out of nowhere, he was asking me to meet him. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I couldn't ignore him. The lighthouse had always been our place. When we first moved to this town, we would go there to watch the sunset, to talk about our future, to dream about the life we were building together. It seemed fitting, in a way, that this was where Walter wanted our final confrontation to take place. I arrived just as the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. The lighthouse stood tall against the horizon, its light casting long shadows across the rocky shore. Walter was waiting for me. He stood by the edge of the cliff, his back to me, staring out at the ocean. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "You came," he said, without turning around. "I didn't have much of a choice," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment we stood in silence, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks filling the space between us. I should have known that Walter wouldn't just disappear without a final confrontation. It had been weeks since I received the letter, weeks since I had come to terms with the fact that my life was over. The house had been sold, the gallery was in the process of being transferred to new ownership, and I was living in a small apartment on the other side of town, trying to figure out what to do next. But then, one evening, I received a phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but something told me to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaky. "Meet me at the old lighthouse," the voice on the other end said. It was Walter. My heart raced. I hadn't heard his voice in weeks, and now, out of nowhere, he was asking me to meet him. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I couldn't ignore him. The lighthouse had always been our place. When we first moved to this town, we would go there to watch the sunset, to talk about our future, to dream about the life we were building together. It seemed fitting, in a way, that this was where Walter wanted our final confrontation to take place. I arrived just as the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. The lighthouse stood tall against the horizon, its light casting long shadows across the rocky shore. Walter was waiting for me. He stood by the edge of the cliff, his back to me, staring out at the ocean. I approached slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. "You came," he said, without turning around. "I didn't have much of a choice," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment we stood in silence, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks filling the space between us. I didn't know what to say. There was nothing I could say that would make this right, nothing that would undo the damage I had caused. Walter took a step closer, his eyes locked on mine. "Do you know why I asked you to meet me here?" I shook my head, my throat tight with fear. "Because this is where it ends," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is where I say goodbye, for good." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Walter didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the ocean, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "You'll never see me again, Helen," he said quietly. "I'm leaving, for good. And I'm taking everything with me." I stared at him, my mind racing. "What? Where are you going?" "It doesn't matter," he replied. "What matters is that you'll never find me. You'll never know where I am, what I'm doing. You'll be left with nothing but the memory of what you destroyed." Tears streamed down my face as I realized the full extent of what he was saying. Walter wasn't just leaving me. He was erasing me from his life entirely. "Walter, please," I begged, my voice breaking. "Don't do this. We can still fix this. We can—" "It's over, Helen," he said, cutting me off. "It's been over for a long time. You just didn't realize it." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the fading light. I stood there, alone, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks, the only thing left to keep me company. Walter was gone. For good. In the weeks that followed, I tried to pick up the pieces of my shattered life, but there was nothing left to salvage. The house was sold, the gallery had been handed over to new ownership, and I was living in a small, cramped apartment on the other side of town, trying to figure out how to start over at 68 years old. The life I had known for so long was gone, destroyed by my own selfish choices. I spent my days in a haze, going through the motions but never really living. The cryptic messages had stopped, but the silence was even worse. It was as if Walter had erased himself from existence, leaving me with nothing but the memory of what I had lost. I tried to reach out to Greg, but he had distanced himself from me too. He couldn't forgive me for what I had done to our family, and I couldn't blame him. I had betrayed them all, and now I was paying the price. Ethan was gone too. He had moved on to someone else, someone younger, someone who didn't come with the baggage of a broken marriage. I hadn't heard from him in months, and I didn't expect to. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. One afternoon, as I was packing up the last of my belongings from the gallery, I received a letter. It was from Walter. My heart raced as I opened it, hoping for some sign of forgiveness, some indication that he might still care. But the letter was short, to the point, and devastating. "Helen, this is the last time you'll hear from me. I wanted you to know that I've moved on. I've started a new life, far away from the one we shared. You'll never find me, and you'll never be a part of my life again. I've taken everything that mattered to you because you took everything that mattered to me. Goodbye. Walter." I stared at the letter, my hands shaking, the words blurring through my tears. It was over, truly over. Walter had won. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer, my heart heavy with regret. I had destroyed everything I loved, and now I was left with nothing but the ruins of the life I had built. And as I sat there, alone in the empty gallery, I realized that this was my punishment, to live with the knowledge of what I had done, to live with the guilt and the regret for the rest of my life. This was my life now, a life in ruins.
You don't notice the moments that will change your life while they're happening. They slip by, small and subtle, until one day you look back and realize you're standing in the ruins of a life you no longer recognize. I still remember the first time I met Luke Hayes. He was Declan's best friend, full of charm and easy confidence, with that lingering air of promise that comes with youth. He moved through the world as though he knew exactly where he belonged. I should have known better. I should have seen the warning signs in the way his presence filled the room, in the spark of recognition when we exchanged our first real conversation. But I didn't. Or maybe I did, and I ignored it anyway. It began in the gym, a space that had always been my sanctuary. He was just another workout partner at first, someone to talk to between sets. But the conversations grew deeper, the silences charged, until one moment changed everything. What happened next wasn't just a mistake. It was the unraveling of a marriage, a family, and the careful life I'd built brick by brick. It was a story that began with a barbell and ended with a confession I can never take back. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it all happened. You never realize how far a life has drifted until you look back and see the shore miles behind you. My name is Veronica Chase, but most people call me Ronnie. At 54, I had what some might call a charmed life. A successful career as a fitness trainer, a comfortable home, and a marriage that offered stability, if not passion. From the outside, everything looked perfect, but appearances can be deceiving. Roger and I had been married for 12 years, and while he was a good man, a dependable corporate lawyer who provided for me in every way that mattered, our relationship had settled into a pattern that felt more like a routine than a partnership. We were polite, accommodating, and utterly disconnected. Then there was Declan, Roger's son from his first marriage. Declan was 26, brilliant, and introverted. He lived with us while pursuing a postgraduate degree, his time split between studying, gaming, and spending hours with his small group of friends. Though we weren't close, we'd settled into an easy coexistence. He stayed out of my way, and I stayed out of his. One of those friends, however, was harder to ignore. Luke Hayes was Declan's best friend, a 28-year-old with the kind of easy charisma that turned heads without trying. He was tall, athletic, and carried himself with a confidence that hinted at a brighter past. Once a promising baseball player, Luke's career had been cut short by a knee injury that left him searching for a new purpose. When Declan asked if Luke could use our home gym, I didn't hesitate. Our garage had been converted into a state-of-the-art workout space, equipped with everything from free weights to cardio machines, a perfect setup for my training clients. Luke just needs a place to stay active, Declan had said. It's only temporary. Of course, I'd replied. At first, Luke was just another presence in the house, someone who passed through on his way to the gym. But over time, he became a regular fixture, his visits stretching longer as he lingered to chat or adjust his workout routine. The first time I really noticed him, it was during a quiet afternoon in the gym. I just finished a training session when Luke arrived, dropping his bag near the weights. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his tone casual. "Not at all," I said, stepping aside to make room. We worked out side by side, our conversation light and easy. He asked about my career, and I told him about my years as a trainer, my passion for health and fitness, and how I'd built my business from scratch. "You've got discipline," he said, nodding appreciatively. "It's impressive." I laughed, brushing off the compliment. "Discipline is just a fancy word for stubbornness." "No," he said, his tone more serious. "It's more than that. You've got something most people don't. Drive." Something in his voice caught me off guard, and for a moment our eyes met. The conversations grew deeper over time. Luke was easy to talk to, his openness a stark contrast to the guarded interactions I'd grown used to with Declan and Roger. He spoke candidly about his struggles after the injury, the identity crisis that came with losing his career, and his determination to find a new path. "Baseball was my whole life," he admitted one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. When it was gone, I didn't know who I was anymore. I nodded, understanding more than I let on. It's hard to lose something that defines you. You get it, he said, his gaze steady. I wasn't sure if I did, but his words lingered long after he left. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I found myself thinking about Luke. His energy, his humor, the way he seemed to notice things most people overlooked. It was a sharp contrast to the growing distance between Roger and me. Our marriage hadn't always been this way. In the beginning, we'd been passionate, connected. But over the years, Roger's demanding career had taken priority, and our relationship had faded into the background. I told myself it was normal. Every marriage has its ebbs and flows, its highs and lows. But lately, the lows felt like they were all we had left. The first time I realized Luke saw me differently, it was a simple comment, innocent on the surface, but with an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. You're in better shape than most trainers half your age, he said, his tone light but his eyes lingering. I laughed it off, but something about the way he looked at me stayed with me long after he'd gone. By the time summer rolled around, Luke's visits had become a regular part of my week. He'd show up in the afternoons, his easy smile brightening the gym as we worked out together. One particularly warm day, as the sun streamed through the windows, he paused mid-set and glanced at me. You ever feel like you're stuck? He asked, his voice quieter than usual. Sometimes, I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. Why? He shrugged, his expression thoughtful. I don't know, just feels like life's moving around me, but I'm not really part of it. I nodded, his words striking a chord I didn't expect. I know what you mean. For a moment neither of us spoke, the silence stretching between us. Then he smiled, a soft, almost wistful expression. You're different, Ronnie. You see things other people miss. The compliment caught me off guard, and I felt a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed our conversation in my mind. Luke's words, his tone, the way he looked at me, it all felt different. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me, something I wasn't sure I wanted to name. Looking back, I can see how it all unfolded like a slow-motion train wreck. Each moment seemed innocent enough, disconnected from the larger pattern. But when I piece them together, I see how every glance, every word, every shared silence led to that fateful day in the gym. It started like any other workout. The summer heat was relentless, and the gym felt stifling despite the fan I'd set up in the corner. Luke arrived in the late afternoon, his usual easy smile in place, but there was something different in his eyes. A flicker of restlessness I hadn't seen before. Tough day? I asked as he dropped his bag on the floor. You could say that, he replied, rolling his shoulders. Just a lot on my mind. I handed him a water bottle, our fingers brushing briefly. Want to talk about it? He hesitated, then shook his head. Not yet, let's lift first. We worked out in near silence, the sound of clinking weights filling the space. Luke was more focused than usual, his movements precise and controlled. I found myself watching him between sets, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened with each rep. You're pushing harder than usual, I said as he finished a set of deadlifts. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. Sometimes it's the only thing that helps. Helps with what? He glanced at me, his eyes shadowed. Feeling stuck, like nothing I do is enough. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Luke? I began, but he cut me off. Do you ever feel that way? He asked, his tone softer now. Like no matter how hard you try, you're just treading water? I nodded slowly, his words hitting closer to home than I cared to admit. More often than I'd like to admit. We sat on the bench, the weights forgotten. Luke leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. I thought I had it all figured out, he said quietly. The career, the future, and then it all fell apart. I know what it's like to lose something that defines you, I said, my voice just as soft. He looked up at me, his gaze searching. Do you? Because you seem like you have it all together. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. I've spent years pretending I do, but the truth is, I don't. My marriage feels like a business arrangement. My husband barely notices I'm there. Some days I wonder if I even notice myself. The admission hung in the air, heavier than any weight in the gym. When Luke spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You're not invisible, Ronnie. Not to me." The words sent a jolt through me. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. And then he reached out, his hand brushing mine. "Luke, we can't," I began, but he leaned closer, his expression both tender and desperate. "Why not?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Why do we have to keep pretending we're okay when we're not?" Before I could answer, his lips were on mine. It wasn't planned. It wasn't logical. But in that moment, logic didn't matter. The kiss was tentative at first, as if we were both testing the boundaries of what was happening. But it deepened quickly, fueled by months of unspoken tension. When we finally pulled away, my heart was pounding, and I could see the same mix of exhilaration and fear reflected in Luke's eyes. "This was a mistake," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Was it?" he asked, his tone quiet but firm. I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "It can't happen again." Luke nodded slowly, though I could see the conflict in his expression. "If that's what you want." He left soon after, leaving the gym and me in silence. I sat there for a long time, replaying the moment in my mind. The way his hands felt, the way his words lingered in the air, the way he saw me in a way Roger hadn't in years. But with the memory came the crushing weight of guilt. The next few days were a blur. I threw myself into my work, scheduling back-to-back training sessions to keep myself distracted. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the memory of that kiss, or the feelings it had stirred. Luke continued to visit the house, but he kept his distance. Our conversations were brief, polite, and carefully devoid of anything personal. I thought the space would help. I thought it would give me the clarity I needed to put the moment behind me. But instead, it left me feeling hollow. Roger, oblivious to the turmoil in my mind, continued to bury himself in his work. He'd come home late, exhausted and distracted, barely acknowledging me before retreating to his office. One evening, as we sat in silence over dinner, I found myself wondering how we'd gotten here. How had we gone from a couple who couldn't keep their hands off each other to two strangers sharing a house? "Long day?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah," he replied without looking up. That was it. No follow-up, no return question, just a single, dismissive word. I stared at him, my chest tightening. "Roger, are you happy?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked up, his brow furrowing. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one," I said quietly. He hesitated, then shrugged. "I guess so. Why?" "Because I'm not," I admitted, my voice trembling. Roger's expression shifted, a flicker of something, guilt, frustration, I wasn't sure what, crossing his face. But he didn't respond. Instead, he stood up, muttering something about work, and left the room. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I allowed myself to admit the truth. I was lonely. And Luke had made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. It's funny how guilt can become a constant companion. It doesn't shout or demand attention. It simply lingers, a quiet presence that never lets you forget. In the days following that moment in the gym, guilt shadowed me everywhere. It crept into my thoughts during workouts, clung to me while I prepped meals, and made its home in the silence of my evenings with Roger. But there was something else too, a restlessness, a yearning. Every time Luke walked through the door, I felt it stir, an ache I couldn't entirely suppress. I told myself I could control it, that I could compartmentalize the kiss and move on. But emotions have a way of defying logic. It wasn't long before Declan began to notice the subtle shifts in the household dynamic. Declan had always been observant, though he rarely voiced his thoughts. He was the type to watch from the sidelines, quietly piecing together puzzles others didn't even know they were creating. "You've been spending a lot of time in the gym lately," he remarked one evening as I cleaned up after dinner. I glanced at him, my hands tightening around the dish towel. "It's my job, Declan. You know that?" "Yeah, but..." He hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You and Luke seem different lately." My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, leaning against the counter. "I don't know. It's just an observation." Before I could respond, he turned and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my growing unease. Luke and I continued to avoid any personal conversations, but the tension between us was impossible to ignore. Every interaction felt like walking a tightrope, and I was painfully aware of Declan's watchful eyes. Meanwhile, Roger grew increasingly distant. He came home later each night, his excuses growing thinner. At first I assumed it was just work, but there were moments, like the way he avoided meeting my gaze, that made me wonder if there was more to it. One evening, as I folded laundry in the bedroom, Roger walked in, his phone in hand. "I've got a conference next weekend," he said, not bothering to elaborate. "Another one?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "It's important," he replied curtly, tossing his tie onto the bed. I bit back a retort, the familiar anger bubbling beneath the surface. Instead, I nodded and focused on the pile of clothes in front of me. That night, as I lay in bed beside him, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were both living separate lives under the same roof. A few days later, Declan cornered me in the kitchen. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his tone casual but his expression anything but. "Of course," I replied, though my stomach churned with unease. "Is there something going on between you and Luke?" The question hit like a punch to the gut. I froze, struggling to maintain my composure. "What are you talking about?" He crossed his arms, his gaze steady. "I'm not blind, Veronica. I see the way he looks at you, Taft, and the way you avoid looking at him." "You're imagining things," I said quickly, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. "Am I?" Declan pressed, his tone sharper now. "Because it doesn't feel like I am." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. After a long, tense silence, Declan shook his head and left the room, muttering under his breath. That evening, Luke showed up at the house, his expression guarded. "I need to talk to you," he said as I ushered him into the gym. "Now's not a good time," I replied, glancing over my shoulder to make sure Declan wasn't within earshot. "Ronnie," he said, his voice soft but firm, "we can't keep pretending this didn't happen." I turned to face him, my chest tightening. "We don't have a choice. Do you know what this could do to my family? And what about you?" he asked, stepping closer. "What about what this is doing to you?" His words struck a nerve, and for a moment I couldn't look at him. "Luke, please," I whispered, my voice breaking. But he didn't back down. "I can't stop thinking about you, Ronnie. I know you feel it too." Before I could respond, the door opened, and Declan walked in. The room fell silent as his gaze shifted between us, his expression darkening. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. Declan's question hung in the air like a thunderclap. "What the hell is going on here?" he repeated, his voice sharper now. His eyes darted between Luke and me, his expression a mix of confusion and fury. "Declan, it's not what you think," I said quickly, stepping forward. He raised a hand, cutting me off. Don't even try to lie." Luke opened his mouth to speak, but Declan rounded on him. "And you," he spat, his voice trembling with anger. "You're supposed to be my friend. What the hell are you doing with her?" "It's not like that," Luke began, his tone placating. "Oh, really?" Declan snapped. "Then what is it like?" I felt my heart pounding in my chest, the walls of the gym suddenly closing in. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the moment everything came crashing down. "Declan, please, let's talk about this," I said, my voice trembling. "Talk about what?" he demanded, his hands clenched into fists. "About how my best friend is sneaking around with my stepmother? About how the two of you are lying to my face?" Luke stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Declan, I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "You didn't mean for this to happen?" Declan repeated, his voice rising. "Are you serious right now?" I reached for Declan's arm, but he pulled away, his anger boiling over. "Don't touch me," he said coldly. "You've already done enough." The argument spilled out of the gym and into the house, the tension drawing Roger into the fray. He walked into the kitchen just as Declan slammed his fist onto the counter. "What the hell is going on?" Roger demanded, looking between us. Declan turned to him, his face pale with anger. "Why don't you ask her?" he said, pointing at me. Roger's brow furrowed in confusion. "What's he talking about, Veronica?" I opened my mouth to respond, but Declan beat me to it. "She's been sneaking around with Luke," he said bluntly. The room went silent. Roger looked at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and growing rage. "Is that true?" I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell him that Declan was mistaken, that it was all a misunderstanding. But the truth was written all over my face. "Yes," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Roger's face turned red, his hands clenching into fists. "How could you?" he said, his voice shaking with fury. "How could you do this to me, to us?" I didn't mean for it to happen, I said, tears streaming down my face. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, he snapped. You've destroyed everything. Roger stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there with Declan and Luke. The silence that followed was deafening. This is unbelievable, Declan muttered, shaking his head. You're both disgusting. Luke flinched at his words but didn't respond. Declan, please, I began, but he cut me off. Don't, he said sharply. I don't want to hear it. He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Roger didn't come home that night. When I called his phone, it went straight to voicemail. Declan stayed in his room, the sound of music blasting from behind his door. And Luke disappeared. I waited for days, hoping he'd come by or call, but he didn't. The gym felt emptier without him, a stark reminder of everything that had been lost. Roger eventually returned, but things between us were irrevocably broken. He moved into the guest room and barely spoke to me unless it was absolutely necessary. I'm filing for divorce, he said one evening, his tone cold and distant. I nodded, unable to argue. I understand. Declan avoided me whenever possible, his resentment simmering just beneath the surface. The rare moments we did speak were tense and strained, his words laced with bitterness. You ruined everything, he said one evening as he passed me in the hallway. I didn't respond. What could I say? Weeks turned into months, and life settled into a new, uncomfortable normal. Roger and I finalized the divorce, and Declan moved out, cutting off contact with both of us. One afternoon, as I was leaving the grocery store, I saw Luke standing in the parking lot. He looked different, older, somehow, as though the weight of everything had taken a toll on him. Ronnie, he said, his voice hesitant. Luke, I replied, my heart aching at the sight of him. I'm sorry, he said, his eyes filled with regret. For everything. So am I said quietly. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us heavy with unspoken words. Take care of yourself, he said finally, turning to leave. You too, I whispered, watching him walk away. They don't tell you how quiet life gets after a storm like this. The silence isn't peaceful, it's suffocating. After Roger and Declan left, the house felt cavernous. Each room was a reminder of what I'd lost, or more accurately, what I'd destroyed. The sound of Roger's briefcase snapping shut, Declan's music filtering through the hallway, even the faint clinking of dishes from our once-shared dinners. All of it was gone. But what lingered most was the guilt. The divorce was swift and cold, handled almost entirely through lawyers. Roger avoided any direct communication with me, and when he did speak, it was clipped and emotionless. We're done here, he said the day we signed the papers, his voice devoid of the warmth it once held. I didn't try to argue. There was nothing left to say. The settlement left me with the house, though I wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. Every inch of it felt like a monument to what had gone wrong. The gym, in particular, was unbearable. I couldn't step foot in it without thinking of Luke. His laughter, his voice, the way he'd made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. Eventually, I packed up most of the equipment and sold it. The emptiness in the garage mirrored the emptiness inside me. Word spreads fast in neighborhoods like ours, and soon I became the subject of whispered gossip. The once friendly smiles of my neighbors turned into tight-lipped glances. Invitations to barbecues and book clubs stopped coming. One day I ran into Mrs. Cartwright, who lived 2 doors down. She'd always been chatty, but now her tone was clipped. Such a shame about you and Roger, she said, her eyes scanning me like she was cataloging my sins. Life happens, I replied, forcing a smile. She nodded, clearly unimpressed. Yes, I suppose it does. Declan, for his part, cut off all communication. He moved in with a friend and ignored every call, every text. I tried reaching out, apologizing, explaining, but my messages went unanswered. The loss of him hurt more than I expected. Declan had never been particularly close to me, but his absence left a void I hadn't anticipated. And then there was Luke. After that brief encounter in the parking lot, he disappeared again. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved to another city, taking a job as a personal trainer at a gym downtown. Part of me wanted to reach out, to apologize, to explain. But I knew it wouldn't change anything. The damage was done. With nothing else to do, I threw myself into my work. I expanded my client base, taking on more personal training sessions and even starting a new fitness class at the local community center. The work was exhausting, but it gave me a purpose, something to focus on beyond the wreckage of my personal life. One afternoon, after wrapping up a session, I found a letter waiting for me on my desk. The handwriting was unfamiliar, and there was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Dear Ronnie, I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. I know things didn't end the way either of us wanted, but I'll always be grateful for the time we had. Take care of yourself. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. Months turned into a year, and slowly life began to rebuild itself. I started volunteering at the community center, offering free fitness classes to people recovering from injuries. It felt good to give back, to use my skills for something meaningful. I also began reaching out to Declan again, though it was a slow and painful process. One day, he finally responded to one of my messages. It was a short text. Just 2 words. It wasn't much, but it was a start. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that life doesn't come with neat endings. It's messy, unpredictable, and often cruel, but it's also resilient. The scars of what happened will always be there, but they don't have to define me. I'll never forget Luke or the way he made me feel. But I've also learned that some chapters are meant to end, no matter how much you wish they could go on.